Welcome to Behind the Investigation on Atlanta News First. I'm investigative reporter Andy Parati. Joining me now is investigative reporter Sierra Cummings. How are you?
I am doing so well. Happy to be here, especially to talk about this project.
Yeah, I just rewatched this story and I immediately turned to you and said, Sierra, this is such a good story, so compelling. You really feel for this family, for this situation. Take us back. Remind us what this is a story about. This is a series, Stolen Sobriety, about flaws with the state's contractor that uses drug screening testing.
Yeah, and just as you said, the series is called Stolen Sobriety. So as the name implies, these are people that willfully admit, hey, I am an addict, but I'm a recovering addict. I am someone who has dealt with addiction, but I am no longer actively using drugs. But here's how it works. Typically, if you're a parent in the state of Georgia, and this process is very similar in other states as well, if you're a parent and you're accused of using drugs, once there's some state intervention, your parental rights aren't immediately terminated. Your child isn't forever taken away from you. There's a long process, and typically what happens is that a judge will decide, in order for you to have your kids back in your physical custody and or in order for you to keep your parental rights, you're going to have to commit to sobriety, random drug screens. You're going to have to stay sober, and typically that agreement is about 12 months, but it could be shorter, it could be longer, but that's the typical process. And so these families enter this case plan, this agreement, saying like, hey, I want to be in my children's life. I want to either have custody over them or have some kind of temporary visits with them. And all of that is really contingent on whether they stay sober. So these are families that have reached out to us and said, I have been sober, yet when I am drug screened by the state of Georgia's subcontracted labs, my drug screens have come back positive for drugs, but I know I have not been doing drugs. The nature of this project is a tricky one because, Andy, I'm sure addiction has touched so many of our families, but if you know anything about someone who's suffering from addiction, part of that process is maybe them being dishonest. So even the nature of this topic is really tricky. So you've got to find as much evidence that that matches what this person is saying or disproves what this person is saying. So this is Daydrianna's case, and this is a family that we've been able to follow as she's trying to continue to keep her parental rights. And from what we can tell, her state subcontracted drug results conflict with drug results that have been done at private labs. And I should point out private labs that are legitimate labs. These are the LabCorps of the world, Quest Diagnostics, labs that we know about. And so here's Daydrianna's case. Listen, watch, hear her story. Daydrianna Hefner wants to cut right to the chase. There's no point in hiding these mugshots. She did drugs. It landed her in prison.
I needed to get arrested to have that long, clear frame of mind.
A Cherokee County mom with an addiction that caused intervention from the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services, known as DFCS. The state agency placed her 2 kids in foster care October 2021. To get her kids back, Daydrianna agreed to random drug screens.
It's going into my 3rd year.
Nearly 3 years of sobriety, except her drug tests don't show that.
Flabbergasted, honestly, and I was like, how is that even possible?
Hair follicle drug test results from DFCS subcontracted labs show multiple times she tested positive for drugs.
Saying that I failed drug screens, that I know I haven't used any drugs.
After positive drug tests, the state has the right to ask a judge to consider terminating Daydrianna's parental rights. So at the advice of her attorney and even her mom, Daydrianna began getting tested at independent labs too.
Ours is negative and theirs is saying positive.
State subcontracted labs showing positive for meth, independent labs showing negative. Daydrianna's allegation of false positives is no outlier. Atlanta News First Investigates uncovered credibility issues with 2 of the largest labs subcontracted to do drug screens for DFCS. The labs are Aver Health and Expertox. Lawsuits around the country show a history of false positive allegations. Expert Talks, DFCS records show their lab did not typically perform a specialized drug test called DL isomer. It would identify legal drugs like medicine versus illicit drugs. Although not required by the state, it could help minimize claims of false positives. And Aver Health, for years, the lab company actually held contracts directly with the state to exclusively do all drug screens for DFCS. That exclusive statewide contract was not renewed again last year. This after records reveal long-standing concerns from caseworkers. A DFCS County director reporting a 2019 case of an alleged false negative, calling it a safety issue for a child, writing, "We rely on drug screen results to be accurate. We received an erroneous negative on the mother. It was a key factor in returning a child to the mother." Aver Health called the results a keying error due to manual entry. Drug tests, which help decide the fate of families like Daydrianna's. Her 2 kids remain in foster care.
Sorry. It's been heartbreaking, really, because not only have my choices affected them and I've had to see what they've gone through, but I've done everything that I've needed to do to fight to get them back, and it's all of my efforts have failed.
All signs point to her sobriety, says peer mentor Christina Carter.
So Daydrianna, she is a walking miracle, 100%. The moms and the dads that they're
Not only is Christina certified in addiction recovery, but she's also the co-founder of Moms Adopting Moms, a local organization that helps parents with DFCS cases get back on their feet. Case management, recovery, housing, employment. Daydrianna's case hits hard for Christina because she says she's witnessed the sobriety and stability, especially after Daydrianna just gave birth to a baby boy and takes care of him.
because I'm not supposed to be invested in these things emotionally, but how could you not, right? I couldn't imagine being sober and doing everything in my power and having these people who know that I'm sober and then being told that I'm not and having my kids taken away.
Should drug tests alone determine the outcome of parental rights?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, they are one tool.
Former DFCS director Tom Rawlings reacting to our findings.
And I think that, what you've highlighted in the reporting that you've been doing on this issue is that I think not only our state child welfare system, but I think other states, we need to look at how we're using these tests.
Rawlings was director from 2018 to 2021, a time in which he reviewed complaints of false positives and false negatives. He agrees the results may create caseworker bias about a parent's sobriety, but now he advocates reviewing policy and standards around the reliability of the test.
We need to be talking with experts on, what does it actually mean to have this particular level of positivity. I think one of the things that may very well come out of this series and this investigation you're doing is we really need to be looking at how we use drug screening and how we ensure that a drug screen is not the end-all, be-all.
Daydrianna and her family hope it's not the end-all, be-all for their case either.
We're willing to do whatever is necessary, but I just don't have a lot of faith in our system.
I love all of my kids, and I'm never gonna stop fighting for them.
Sierra, you really feel for Daydrianna and her family. And one of the things that really struck out to me is, yes, there's that element of, is she telling the truth? Mm-hmm. Is she not? But I often try to put myself, and I'm sure you do this as well, in someone else's shoes going, she is putting herself in public and saying that she is a recovering drug addict. Mm-hmm. How, that's got to be embarrassing. And this is the length that she's going to try to get her children back by telling the world, yes, I did this, but I'm sober.
Yeah, it is embarrassing, but it takes a certain level of humility. You saw at the start of the story, we run all of her mugshots. Upon me, I mean, I had met with her virtually and over the phone in the weeks before I decided to do a formal sit-down interview with her, because that's this vetting process, like actually verifying the documentation in this case. But upon me meeting her in person for the first time, her and her mom were like, you need to run the mugshots in this story. Like, we want people to see the clear comparison. You could see when she's struggling versus how far she's come now. And even if you couldn't tell in the mugshots, they're making the case that the stability shows how far she's come. She's got a house, she's got bills, she's got a job. She has really walked a line of stability, and I think her peer mentor, the woman from Moms Adopting Mom, she really added to this claim, because this woman, not only is she certified in peer addiction recovery, I wish I would have had more time in the story to include it, but the woman certified in peer addiction recovery, Christina Carter, she herself has walked through addiction. She has seen the struggle over the years, and so she classifies Daydrianna as a walking miracle.
We were talking earlier today, and one of my other reactions that I had after watching this story was, what's the commissioner saying about this? Like, when is she going to sit down with you and do an interview with you about this issue?
And the commissioner, by that you mean the DFCS commissioner. Her name is Candace Broche.
Right.
She has been the commissioner for about 3 years now, appointed by Governor Brian Kemp. And in that same time that she's been commissioner, I've been on this self-assigned child welfare beat. And you know, Andy, she has not sat down and done a formal interview with us. They have not given a formal statement on this specific case, or really any cases, because of child confidentiality laws or privacy rights. So they very rarely comment on specific cases, but they can talk about processes
and policy.
Yeah, and policy, and just the general steps that caseworkers should be taking should a parent allege, I am sober and this is saying that I'm positive for drugs and I haven't done drugs. So that's a roundabout way of saying DFCS did not interview, but they did give us a statement essentially saying they give parents a variety of options to test, and that if a parent alleges a false positive, there's a long step that they require from these subcontracted labs, which is a sworn statement verifying the chain of custody, the methods in which were used to test this, and it's essentially a sworn affidavit. The lab is having to say that I am saying these lab results are true and accurate, but otherwise it would go before a judge, and it's got to be litigated that way. But it really is frustrating, because you heard in there the former DFCS director basically saying we've got to investigate the test, we've got to test the test, and that a case alone shouldn't be decided by drug test results.
When it deals with child custody.
Yeah, and to a point that you raised in your previous question, you know, there is that element of, is this person telling the truth, whether it's Daydrianna or not. So I would like to point out that this series, our goal isn't to say, like, everybody making this claim should get their child back. I think the point that this series is doing a good job at raising is, what is the legitimacy of these tests and the labs that are performing the tests?
And it should be the only thing that makes that determination.
Right, and if there is a claim of a false positive, there certainly could be a claim of false negative. And so if there's a lot of these questions surrounding these labs or these testing methods, that alone should be enough to reevaluate policy. So we do hope to maybe at some point hear from DFCS, even if it isn't in a sit-down formal interview with Atlanta News First Investigates. Oftentimes what will happen is, and you know this, we do report on a lot of these topics. We get the stakeholders involved, and then state leaders get involved, and somehow or another DFCS has to go before the legislative session and kind of openly talk about the issues we've already reported on.
So before I let you go, what's next in this series? I think that you have another story related to this series coming up, right?
Yeah, we've got a third part to this series coming up in a few weeks here, and it centers around a very important perspective, the judges. As we've talked about over the last two stories, really yes, there are state policies in play, but it's the judge that has the final say. This is not, these defects cases, these parental rights cases don't go before a jury.
Right.
It's going to be a judge evaluating whether this is a legitimate case or not. So we finally get to hear from some judges who have raised concerns about the drug tests and the labs who are doing these drug tests. So I can't wait to run that piece in a couple weeks.
Yeah, we can't wait to see it. Sierra, thank you for staying on top of this. Really important stuff. Important for a lot of families that are trying to get their lives back together and hopefully reunite with their children. I'm sure that's the state's goal at the end of the story, at the end of the day when it comes to this stuff. To watch more of Sierra's investigations, go to this story on AtlantaNewsFirst.com or anywhere where you find your podcasts.